three persons on stage. Professor Alfred de Zayas from the Geneva School of Diplomacy and International Relations. He is a lawyer and expert in human rights and international law. Then we have Mr. Ambassador Ronald Barnes, permanent representative of the Alaska Indigenous tribes before the UN Human Rights Council. And finally, we have Mr. Barrister Majid Tramboo, Director of the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities and Executive Member of Organization of Kashmir Coalition. Very long names, but that will be, this is our panel today, and I give the floor to Mr. Barnes, I guess. So, Mr. Barnes.
Yes, this time my role is moderating and not lecturing. I just come back from a 3-day conference in Athens on the issue of genocide. As you probably know today,
Alfred,
yes.
Right. Can we have the moderator in the center, please?
That is easily arranged. And I move with my little items and with my orange juice. Okay, I'm all set.
Thank you, so that we are next to each other.
As I was saying today, 71 years ago, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide was adopted. Tomorrow, we will celebrate the 71st anniversary of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, the General Assembly was at the Palais Chaillot in Paris, and they managed to get the Genocide Convention through before midnight on the 9th, and the Universal Declaration after midnight. That's how come you have the two days. It could have been on the same day. Both could have been on the 9th, but they didn't quite manage. It went spilled over like most United Nations meetings. In any event, we will be talking about, pretty open-ended, about human rights perspective and everything that it's still missing, because obviously, as we know, we got wonderful norms. Standard setting has been very successful, very rich. We have 10 core human rights conventions: Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Convention Against Torture, etc., etc. We have all these expert committees. We have the resolution-based organs like the Human Rights Council. We have the Universal Periodic Review. And, of course, human rights are being violated systematically throughout the world by my dear country of nationality, the United States of America, by almost everybody. Maybe not by the Vatican, but almost every state is engaged in one way or another in violating human rights. On the other hand, if we did not have the Universal Declaration, if we did not have this monitoring system, it will be even worse than it is today. I must say, I'm an optimist. I am persuaded that the world was even worse before the United Nations arrived, even worse before the League of Nations. So at least we have the mechanisms. At least we know that violations are occurred. In the past, silence. In the past, secrecy covered every single genocide. And there are aggressions, hot wars and cold wars and economic wars. And one of those groups of people mostly ignored by the mainstream media are the indigenous. I mean, people tend to forget when they talk about clash of civilizations, they only think about the clash of civilizations between Muslims and Christians, or between the East and the West, etc. They don't realize that the greatest clash of civilizations is when Europeans arrived in the Americas, and they didn't discover the Americas. The Americans were very much inhabited. You had 10 million human beings in the north, and you had 60, 70 human beings in Central and South America, in what is today Mexico and Brazil, et cetera, very densely populated. And these people were essentially colonized, but they were never decolonized, unlike in Africa and in Asia, where the Africans at least got their lands back, et cetera. In North America, in Alaska, I mean, the indigenous were despoiled of their lands, of their natural resources, of their gold, of their oil, of their uranium and everything. And who draws the benefits? Obviously, the Europeans, obviously the colonizers, obviously the settlers, or if I may even say the migrants, because we Europeans were migrants to the New World. And we will hear from Ronald about, developments in the permanent form on minorities and on the indigenous. And you will tell us about Vicky Tauli-Corpus, the special rapporteur, and my former colleague, the special rapporteur on indigenous. And our friend Tramboo will tell us about really the dire conditions, the daily, really gross violations of human rights that are occurring in Kashmir. And although since 1946-47, there have been resolution after resolution concerning Kashmir, and India refuses to respect them. There's no referendum, there's no self-determination for the people of Kashmir. Now, in the audience, if there's anyone who doesn't know it yet or who might be interested in it, I brought a considerable number of my report to the General Assembly on the theory and practice of self-determination. So I have a whole batch of that report with me. I also have some copies of my report to the Human Rights Council on the 23 principles of international order. So if 23 principles of international order were observed, your problems would be solved, your problems would be solved, and we would not be in this horrendous, vicious circle of crimes and countermeasures and sanctions and all of that. I also mention the conference I just come from. I spent 4 days in Athens, in the Parthenon, in Acropolis. In any event, the conference was in the new super modern conference center that they have there. And topic of the conference was another one of these unsung victims, the Greeks of Pontus. I don't know who knows where Pontus is. Pontus is the whole north of Asia Minor, which since time immemorial, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, was peopled by Greeks. And Trabzon, famous town on the shore of the Black Sea. I mean, these Christians were subjected to persecution, discrimination, all sorts of indignities. But then, under the cover of the First World War, came genocide. Get rid of them. Finally get rid of the Armenians. Get rid of the Christians. Get rid of the Chaldeo-Assyrians. Get rid of the Greeks of Pontus and Smyrna, etc., etc. And all of that was called, even then, by the Brits, the French, and the Russians. They issued a statement to the Sultan, Mehmed VI, calling it a crime against humanity. And they were supposed to be punished at the end of the First World War, but then you had a coup d'etat. You had General Mustafa Kemal, who overthrew the Sultan, overthrew the government of the then Ottoman Empire, created a new republic, but continued the genocide. So the genocide went on and on and on, and in all, about 1.5 million Armenians and about 1 million Greeks were killed. And as I noted in one of my speeches, the genocidal animus has not disappeared. Just the target is different. Since they got rid of the Armenians and they got rid of the Greeks, now the genocidal animus is directed against the Kurds. And they are the most in danger today. In any event, I called for revisiting the Treaty of Lausanne of 1923. I called it a juridical dinosaur, since it's really totally incompatible with the UN Charter, with modern international law, with principles of self-determination, et cetera, et cetera. The speaker of Erdogan already vituperated against the conference because it was hosted by the president of Greece, and it was opened by the prime minister of Greece, who made some very important statements. So that was all over the press in Ankara and in Istanbul, all of us being insulted as revisionists. Terrible, terrible.
Very surprising.
Okay, not very surprising. So genocide, unfortunately, is not a matter for the past or for yesterday. Unfortunately, it's a reality today, and there are many people who are threatened with this kind of genocide, including the Amerindians of the Amazon. Jair Bolsonaro is really a dangerous man. He's very dangerous not only for the general environment and the climate, but it's also dangerous for human beings, including the indigenous of Brazil. Now, who wants to speak first? Do you want to speak first, Ronald?
And if Majid wants to, he can.
Yeah.
I don't mind. Can you switch off your mic, though?
Okay, then
Oh, you will, yeah, this was.
when, so our old friend, director of the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities, Barrister Majid Tramboo, barrister in London,
Thank you,
just flew in. Hope that you're not totally tired from the journey. I am tired from the journey from Greece, I must say. Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Professor Zayas. I'm very grateful to be invited to this very important briefing. Yes, today is also the day for the genocide on the 9th December. And tomorrow is the day for the UDHR, Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And we are here to celebrate both of them and to remind all the stakeholders, the policymakers, and the entire world community that these are very important instruments which need to be abided by in letter and spirit. And as Professor said, genocide is not yesterday's event. Unfortunately, even in today's modern world, post-UN creation, it still is on. I would wish to give some glimpses on the Kashmir issue, which is unfortunately seen as an issue between India and Pakistan, but really the issue is of the people of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and largely people of Jammu and Kashmir seem to have been ignored in the equation insofar as this conflict is concerned. Very, very briefly, the Kashmir issue is a United Nations issue. Unfortunately, it became an issue after the dominions of India and Pakistan came into existence, and it was taken over by the two states and divided now between the two dominions. India took the majority of the state, which is commonly known now, Indian-held Kashmir, and the other part of the Kashmir which is about 40%, is with Pakistan, which is commonly called Azad Kashmir or Free Kashmir. Whether it is free or not is a question, is a debatable question. But there is also a portion, a major portion, under the Chinese, which is called Aksai Chin. There is no population there, so therefore nobody talks about it. It is twice the territory which is between the two parts of Kashmir, the Indian part and the Pakistani part. But this is the reality of the situation, is that the Kashmir is in three parts, and the matter went to conflict between India and Pakistan. India took it to the United Nations, and that's where the United Nations resolutions came, basically saying that people of Kashmir should be given right to self-determination once the peace is restored there. But unfortunately, that self-determination has not taken place today. The matter to the United Nations was taken by the government of India. It wasn't taken by government of Pakistan. It wasn't taken by Kashmiris themselves, but it was taken by government of India. Yet it is today's factual situation is it's India that is now denying Kashmiris to have right to self-determination in Kashmir. This is the legality of it. And the source of really giving Kashmiris right to self-determination came from, of course, from Article 1 of the UN Charter, followed by Article 55 of the UN Charter, and then, of course, we have ICCPR, International Covenant for Political and
Civil
and political rights, and then, of course, economic and social rights, which is Article 1 as well. So the legality of Kashmir is there. Recently, you might have heard quite a lot about Kashmir. Very commonly came into the international media on 5th August 2019. India scraps autonomy of Kashmir, which was basically abrogation of the Indian Constitution's articles, commonly known as 35A and Article 370. But what are those articles? It is something which is not a plank or a basic foundation of the Kashmir dispute. But what it is, and where from it generated, is that in 1927, the then Maharaja of Kashmir issued a notification which prohibited any non-Kashmiris to have a land or employment in Kashmir. And that remained the law until the Indian part of Kashmir was taken over by Indians, and Maharaja negotiated with the Indians that this notification will remain in force until the Kashmir is resolved. So the Indians basically extended that Article 35A and Article 370 to Kashmir, prohibiting Indians to take over any land or to buy any land in Kashmir or to take any employment in Kashmir. That remained the factual situation and the legal situation. But unfortunately, on 5th August this year, the BJP government, which is called nationalist government, but in my view it is a fascist government. The fascist government of India abrogated their own articles of the Indian Constitution, 370 and 35A, on Kashmir. So thereby opening the way for settlements in India, the settlements of India in Kashmir. Now the purpose is very clear, and the purpose is to have the Indian settlements in Kashmir. And broadly speaking, what BJP's manifesto made it absolute, Bharatiya Janata Party, that is the party, political party which is in power in India, and of which Prime Minister Modi belongs to that party. BJP's manifesto is very clear, that they want to have 4 settlements in Kashmir. First is what they call Sainik settlement. Sainik settlement colony means, Sainik means military. All those military men who have served in Kashmir or who have been killed in action in Kashmir will be given land in Kashmir. They will be having a settlement area, a colony created for them, which will run into thousands. Then they are saying that they will have what they call West Pakistan refugees settlement colony. That is relating to those people who migrated in 1947 when India-Pakistan were divided in 2 parts. Those refugees who came from the Pakistan side, West Pakistan side, to India, they want their families to settle down in Kashmir. I don't know what is logic behind it, other than to have Hindutva settlements in Kashmir. So that colony they want to create. Then, of course, they want to create what they call corporate colony, Indian corporate colony in Kashmir. So they want to create that the Indian corporate should go into Kashmir, invest in Kashmir, and what they call developmental program for Kashmir, but they will create that separate colony so that whatever employment is brought by the Indian corporate to Kashmir, they will be settled in Kashmir in those colonies. And finally, the 4th settlement colony they want to make sure that it is there is called the Pundit Colony. Pundit Colony are those Kashmiri Pundits who had left Kashmir in 1989, and they want to bring them back to Kashmir. We as Kashmiris have no problem with bringing back the Pundit Kashmiris because they are Kashmiris. But to create a colony for them is what is deplorable, because Kashmir belongs to them equally as much as it belongs to me. Why to have to create a Pundit colony under the name of Hindutva? So these are the programs of BJP. We were told throughout that Article 370 and 35A will not be abrogated by BJP. It is just on the election manifesto, but they did it. And now these settlements, they have a particular program. 2020, they want to bring first the corporate India. Then 2021, they want to settle Sainik colony. And 2022, they want to have West Pakistan refugees and Pundit. So that in 2023, which is the election year of BJP, for India to have general elections, so that they can go and sell it to the Indian masses, Hindutva masses, to say, we have given you Kashmir, we have annexed Kashmir, we have settled everything there, all now the demographic change is there, so you have to vote us in. So the whole purpose of this abrogation is really the demographic change as it is, and it's a fact, and one has to accept it. It's a Muslim majority state, the only state in whole of India which has a Muslim majority, and they want to convert this into a Hindutva majority, and then perhaps one day say to the United Nations, okay, we are ready to hold right to self-determination in Kashmir. Come and do it now. Yes. So it's a very draconian thing. What has happened since 5th August, and that's where I come to genocide and other very crucial and important issues. There has been a total blockade of Kashmir since 5th August until today. Today is the 127th day of blockade. What is the blockade? When it was about to be announced, all the telephones were disconnected, whether it is mobile phones, whether it is landlines. They were all disconnected. Internet services were disconnected. Till today, they are disconnected. And the entire state, including Jammu, which has a Hindu majority in Jammu, was put under total curfew. So no one could come out, no one could go in, complete shutdown, complete lockout, complete blockade of Kashmir since 5th August. It has gradually eased out in Jammu area. It has gradually eased out in a way of restoration of landlines in Kashmir, upper part of Kashmir, which is the elite part of Kashmir, and some of the mobiles, what they call prepaid mobiles, have been to a certain extent restored. But the restriction on movement is absolutely still there. So 126 days, it is on, and it is in a very, very draconian type of a situation. What is the outcome of this thing? 3 things I want to highlight here. First of all, the economic blockade. Kashmir is very well known for its tourism and handicraft industry. Now, both because of the 5th August declaration and Kashmir having locked down, there is a total economic blockade of Kashmir. Economist reported in its second issue in October 2019, $4 billion have been lost between 5th August till the day they wrote that report. $4 billion economy is lost for Kashmir because it's all related to handicraft and to tourism and to related fruit industry. So this is the major blockade that we have seen. So Kashmiris are basically and essentially starving. Second major thing, total collapse of healthcare. Now, obviously there is no movement of people. They are not allowed to come out. The most affected would, are 2 categories, primarily 2 categories. One is, of course, pregnant women who can't reach to their hospitals, who need immediate attention to go to hospitals, but they can't reach there. And of course, the second part of it is the life-saving drugs, such as people who are having cancer, they can't have chemotherapy in Kashmir because that is not there anymore. Or people who are diabetic, chronic diabetic patients, they can't have dialysis there. So these are life-saving drugs are not reaching to Kashmir. And this is purposely done. This is not that India still could have allowed the drugs to flow to Kashmir or generally the health care to be taken care of, but they have done it purposely, deliberately, willfully to see that Kashmiris suffer from the health care point of view as well. Then third important element of this blockade has been the total collapse of educational system. All schools or colleges are closed from 5th August till today. No one is going to school or college and no examinations are being conducted. So the students, either in schools or colleges, have terribly lost the current year. We don't know until when, but whether they will be able to go back in March or April when the session starts there. But the current situation is that there is a total collapse of educational system as well. So this is the result of the abrogation. Abrogation has not done any good to India. Abrogation has done certainly very bad for Kashmiris. Over the years, other day I heard the Home Minister of India, Amit Shah, in a TV program saying Kashmir has lost 40,000 people. According to our estimates, it's about 90,000 people since 1989. He was claiming because of this blockade, there have been very few deaths in Kashmir. But if we would have left it open, then probably thousands and thousands much more have been killed. But over the years, as Alfred said very rightly, there have been gross human rights violations in Kashmir. Around 90,000 people have been killed, maimed, or tortured. And then there are disappearances, which, according to the Indian government analysis, is about 10,000 people have disappeared, which they have no way to find out where they are. And there are obviously 10,000 half widows are there. This is the type of the situation that has developed there over the years, and that's all because the people of Kashmir were right to self-determination. Then coming to the final point is the climate change in Kashmir. The climate change obviously is massive there. It's all over the world. We have the reports that the heat in Kashmir is increasing phenomenally in comparison to rest of the states in India and Pakistan. And three reasons are given for this. Obviously, one is the cutting down of forests. Over the years, the forests have been completely wiped out as a result of the heat has gone up, and it is affecting the climate dramatically. And secondly, the military movement, which is there. There is a huge military movement on both sides of Kashmir, not only on borders, but in towns, in villages, particularly the Indian part of Kashmir. And because of the military movement and the ammunition that's being used, it's affecting the climate terribly. And the third and the most important thing is the glaciers of Kashmir, the Himalayas, particularly the glacier of Siachen, is melting. And it will have such a dynamic effect on Kashmir that probably it may not be there at all, because that has caused terrible floods in Kashmir. And flood itself has been a very main cause for destroying, one of the main causes to destroying the economy of Kashmir. And Siachen glaciers or other glaciers have been melting again because of the heavy military deployment and the use of ammunition. So this is the reality as on today. What is our position now on Kashmir as Kashmiris? We have been fighting over here at the United Nations and the European Union, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the like intergovernmental organizations over the years. We are very much satisfied to see that the Office of the High Commissioner here issued 2 reports on Kashmir. One was in 2018, and one was this year in 2019 on 5th July. Both the reports are calling on both the countries to sit down and to address this crucial issue, which is developing into a major crisis. And I will come to you how it has been articulated by government of Pakistan in recent times after 5th August, and has identified that there are gross human rights violations taking place in Kashmir, and asked the United Nations Security Council to look into how the people's right to self-determination is accomplished there. So those are the 2 reports. Those have come very recently from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. How is it developing? 5th August has changed the dynamics of Kashmir. The abrogation has changed the dynamics of Kashmir. We must go and analyze the Prime Minister of Pakistan's address in the United Nations. He has practically put the world on notice that if this issue is not resolved, it's a nuclear situation. Both the countries have nuclear. And if there is a military confrontation, it will escalate to the nuclear warfare. Perhaps because the 2 countries cannot fight the conventional war. And if the conventional war goes for 8 days, 10 days, and one of the sides is not making such a great progress, that country has no other option but to use nuclear. And he put the world on notice that it will not be only India and Pakistan that will be affected. it will not be only the region that will be affected, it will have long-term effects on the world as a whole. So this is the seriousness of the issue that needs to be kept in mind, and we hope that India, Pakistan, and the stakeholders around the world, whether it is the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, God knows who, that they need to put their minds together to see that this issue is addressed and some progress is made on this crucial, developing, very seriously developing crisis around the world. We as Kashmiris will continue, of course, our lobby and advocacy wherever it is needed, and we will go on to what we call 2020 Commission Kashmir lobby, which means we will do it much more vigorously at all international forums. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Any kind of conflagration between the two. So
And China is adding fuel on all the region.
Indeed, sir.
important note to note that what is the first vocation of the United Nations and of the Security Council? To save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Not enough is being done in the field of mediation, in the field of peaceful negotiation. That is, should be the top priority for our Secretary General Antonio Guterres, to continue whatever efforts have been undertaken by his predecessors, but insist in the Security Council that this matter be solved through mediation, and that eventually a self-determination referendum be held in the area. As a matter of fact, the United Nations has traditionally been late in organizing and conducting self-determination referenda in Sudan, in Ethiopia, Eritrea, in Timor-Leste. Had the United Nations been more proactive, these referenda could have been held decades earlier, and hundreds of thousands of lives would have been saved. So that is a major point. But what I see here, also in the light of the lectures that I heard in Athens in connection with this conference on the genocide, the Ottoman genocide against the Pontian Greeks, is that we have here a problem of consolidation of the subjugation of the Kashmiris, subjugation through control of information, control of education, not only within Kashmir itself, but also in the world. We're not getting all the news that we want to have, and the mainstream media has not made this into a cause célèbre. It has not emerged into one of those priority issues. Obviously, in international law, annexation following aggression is not only illegitimate, it's illegal. But I mean, that is a technical point. The fact is power. India is exercising power, and by taking the route it has taken, it is putting actually all of us in danger of a nuclear confrontation. I'm particularly concerned about the human rights impacts of blockades. I mean, we know, for instance, the Nazi blockade of Leningrad cost nearly 1 million human lives. Now, the blockade of Kashmir by India is causing deaths. I mean, same as I wrote in my report on Venezuela, the United States blockade of Venezuela, especially the financial blockade, has made it nearly impossible for the country to obtain, say, those medicines that are urgently needed in cases of dialysis, in cases of insulin, antiretroviral drugs, etc., that are urgently needed. Well, those are not coming in. And if you are diabetic and you don't get your insulin, you die. Simple. And Professors Jeffrey Sachs and Mark Weisbrot earlier this year in April published this report estimating that in the year 2018 alone, as a direct result of the blockade and the sanctions, that at least 40,000 human beings had lost their lives in Venezuela. That is something that the mainstream media has not carried, barely carried it. You know, it might be mentioned in passing, but nobody tells you, say, wait a minute, this is important. I mean, and it's the same thing with Kashmir, the same thing with Alaska. Nobody tells you this is important. It is mentioned in passing. And so you're not somehow alerted that action is necessary and that maybe you should be taking action on this particular issue. So having said that, I am going to pass the floor to Ambassador Ronald Barnes. And I'm interested in what you're going to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alfred. And of course, thanks to Majid, Barrister Majid Tramboo. Of course, Professor Alfred Zayas is the former independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. So we're very privileged to have him still with us, as he is the one who made the recommendation for Alaska, Hawaii, Kashmir, and other cases to be sent to the United Nations Decolonization Committee for enlistment or re-enlistment in the case of Alaska and Hawaii.
Paragraph 69, little n, in my report to the General Assembly, already 2013.
Yes. So these, why do we bring this, the discussion about human rights and the lack, what we want to say, of implementation? We know that we have United Nations Security Council resolutions. Of course, the name Ambassador Barnes came in the late 90s, especially when we brought our case to the United Nations Subcommission on Human Rights, and they offered a resolution. And what they stated is that there's apartheid in Alaska. They came, some of the members, including some of the members of United Kingdom, said your case is so strong, Alaska and Hawaii, that you have the right, like Palestine, to go straight to the General Assembly and seek a seat in the United Nations. Many don't know the background of Alaska and why it held this independent status even after this so-called 1867 cession, Treaty of Cession from the monarchy of Russia to United States of America, wherein it didn't take until the 21st century that a report came out saying the 1867 treaty granted neither title or jurisdiction of Alaska to the United States of America. So it was good to have Alfred, someone to look at our case and also to regurgitate what the subcommission, because I said, let's do the resolution next year. United Kingdom and United States of America moved to reduce the mandate of the subcommission. They were going to do it, but maybe it was my mistake in saying, let's prepare this not only for our people, so that we make this something that we can all go in together. Of course, at the end of the mandate of Alfred Zayas, he wrote a memorandum declaring that there's apartheid in Alaska. And I will let him read the paragraph himself after I, make some comments on some of the climate change issues we're facing, some of the issues we're facing with some of our human rights defenders. I'll go for climate change. Indigenous peoples of Alaska, the independent tribal governments deserve a seat at the Arctic Council as an equal voice with a voice to vote. We deserve a seat in the United Nations, like the Kingdom of Hawaii. 1469 removed Alaska and Hawaii. 1959 saying that the peoples of Alaska effectively exercise their right to self-determination. When you look at the history, of course, it wasn't the peoples. We had one person from Switzerland. We had a person from Germany. We had someone from United Kingdom. We had from all over the United States create a constitution. We had the CIA, and what I submitted to this last report for the third cycle of the Universal Periodic Review of United States of America, which will be heard this coming May, that there's a CIA report, and they were fully involved in this. Of course, they have the first page redacted. So what we're saying is that not only did, as it is stated in the Supreme Court cases, the white people and the U.S. military created the Constitution, the majority of them died and were buried outside of Alaska. Could you imagine what would have happened if this was the case for Algeria, for Tunisia, Morocco, Indonesia? Because we know that even in the case of Algeria, the General Assembly said, no French. You cannot vote on the status of Algeria. No French or no Dutch. You cannot vote on the status of Indonesia. It is the Indonesians, it is the Algerians, it is the people of Morocco who decide their status, not French citizens living there. And as Alfred will bring up, this is international human rights law. So what we have is the United States military and the white people who voted in Alaska as a state. And in 1993, the United States Congress, in their apology bill, I believe it was the 16th clause that said that the Hawaiian Kingdom did not cede their state. The 1959 referendum did not cede the status of the peoples of Hawaii. It's the same for Alaska, since we didn't vote, and we are what you call the peoples concerned under Article 73, and if you look at what they call the free political institutions as opposed to puppet governments, the institutions created both in Alaska and Hawaii were created by the US military and the colonizers. Why is this so important today? Because when you look at the accusations about elections, not only in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, in Bolivia, and elsewhere, I watched one state from Africa say, you want to bring up Alaska, or you want to bring up our recent election? We're going to bring up the referendum. The United States turned around. I watched this. I'm a witness. Walked away. They ran away. And I followed them. And they ran to one of the doors inside the Palais des Nations. As I was approaching, they took the door and closed it like this and held it. Why? Because when it comes to Indonesia or other states, they have said point blank, okay, fine, and very nice, very diplomatic. You want to bring up Moluccos? You want to bring up West Papua? What if we brought up Alaska, that 1958 referendum? Who voted? When you look at this, the consequence of this, if you were to go into Alaska right now, and you go to the Anchorage Recording District where they record all the titles, every one of them is going to say quit claim deed. Quitclaim. Quitclaim. What does that mean? It's unsettled title. So in 1958 and 1959, the second cycle UPR, the Great Islamic State of Pakistan, called on the United States of America to send Alaska, Hawaii, and other cases to the Decolonization Committee.
Surprising.
It was a surprise. Even we didn't, though we did the lobby, we lobbied European states, we lobbied states all over, but it was Pakistan who did this. Pakistan is known for promoting the right to self-determination. Now, this is relevant because if we still have title, the United States asserted we were free and independent because they did not want the monarchy of Russia to regulate fur trade between the European merchants who are coming under different flags. You look at Valdez, Cordoba, Spanish flag. Mm-hmm. You look at United States of America, which they called the Bostonians at the time, United States of American flag. If you look at the British flag, because there was a dispute on the line of demarcation from Alaska to Canada, because the United Kingdom wanted Canada to extend all the way to include Alaska. This is why the monarchy of Russia, one of the reasons, because in the 1850s and 60s, the United States offered, or they purchased this because the monarchy of Russia was running low on funds. So they needed money immediately. And the other thing, they couldn't defend United Kingdom pushing forward, which they threatened to do. So Canada, which is named after an extinct indigenous peoples who are melded into the Canadian population, they were told this was a way to stop them and for them to benefit because they needed funds at the time. So what are we facing today? We're also facing in 2018, President Trump met with the governor of Alaska, Dunleavy, on the tarmac in Anchorage. They had a meeting to open what they call the Pebble Mine. The Pebble Mine would be, if I were to use Alaska, I wanted to show a video, but this whole area, they want to create a hole the size of Manhattan to extract what they call rare earth minerals, gold, diamonds. What they project will be between $500 billion and $1 trillion. And of course, that's just one part of this. In the late 90s, because I'm viewed as one of the leaders of the sovereignty movement, one of the members of the Kennedy administration came, said, I want to have a meeting with you. I said, for what? He said, I used to sit on the, where they do all these assessments about mineral and resource, and I want to inform you what you have in the Bristol Bay region. So he brought me out to breakfast and he said, you're sitting on the highest grade of natural gas equal to Libya and others. And we know where all the major discoveries are going to be in the future. And so they will announce these discoveries later. Of course, when United States is hungry for oil or they want to control, we discovered that in the 1970s there was one lady who did a thesis, a doctoral thesis. And what she said was, the United States of America discriminated against its European counterparts, urging them or forcing them to decolonize for one reason. And she said through the communication between members of Congress and other communications, for one reason only, so that they will let go of all of their territories and the United States would be the most powerful government on earth. And I probably should bring this out and disseminate this and show you her all of the research that she did.
With the Monroe Principle.
Well, of course, it's all part of this, the Monroe Doctrine.
Monroe Doctrine is another juridical dinosaur. It's completely incompatible with the UN Charter. It shouldn't be there. I
Yeah.
mean, it's something that should have been thrown out long ago. And when you mention the Monroe Doctrine, I mean, people should laugh.
Right.
But it's a doctrine, it's not a treaty in force.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a treaty in force, but it is practiced. It is official policy.
I want to bring up a couple points here. What is good, and what I talked to some of the young Europeans or some of the Europeans, and what is good about Trump being voted into office, and what are some of the people saying? They're saying it's good he's voted in, because what's coming to the surface is the actual character of United States of America. It's been said many times that, or by different members of Congress, as Nancy Pelosi said, he wants a white America again. What does make America great mean? So what he's doing is the power that the white people had, as they declared not only from the J.V. McIntosh case, where they said we have to adhere to the superior genius of the European civilization. This was a case about indigenous peoples in the Midwest, and they used this case in Alaska when they said the land is for the settlement of the white race. And if Alfred wants, this is his memorandum, he could read you this from this memorandum. So what we're beginning to see is what Alfred mentioned is national security is really a cloak for wrongful acts or violations, the grave violations of human rights, when they're not only in conflict with constitutional law, but when there's a crisis between not only the bicameral system in the United States, Democrats and Republicans, you're seeing the very character of both sides. And someone was watching me and they said, "Who do you support?" And I just sat there. I didn't say nothing. And they said, "Oh, you don't support anyone." I said, "It doesn't matter. If we have a foreign power occupying us, which is, then it doesn't matter which party in Congress is in control." When you look at what Hillary Clinton or some of these people said about the Western Sahara case, or how they want to deal with colonialism, whether you're Democratic or Republican, you're a foreign power from a foreign government occupying a foreign peoples. The United States had a number of treaties with Hawaii. And so they declared that Alaska was independent from Russia. That's their biggest problem, is their admission in diplomatic communications that Alaska was independent from Russia. And they use the word independent tribes inhabiting an independent territory. And another important fact is they said there's no discovery title. International law uses discovery title. They use discovery title.
Not in Australia anymore. By virtue of the Mabo against Queensland case, they officially threw it out. They disavowed the doctrine of discovery because discovery is only of terra nullius. In the moment that the territory is occupied, inhabited, there's no discovery. So you cannot claim title over territory that is occupied. If at all, in the heyday of imperialism, you claim title not through discovery, but through conquest. But conquest is no longer possible, and it is incompatible with the UN Charter, meaning since 1945, all treaties that are incompatible with the UN Charter have to be revised or terminated, Article 103 of the UN Charter, Supremacy Clause, and of course pursuant to the Vienna Convention of the Law of Treaties, Articles 53 and 64. But of course that again is theory, doctrine, what we lawyers like to cite. We cite articles and paragraphs, and nobody pays any attention. So go ahead.
Okay, I'll maybe give you some closing thoughts, or just
Closing thoughts would be better.
no. The thing about climate change,
Yes.
it's a human security issue affecting every one of us throughout the world, whether we like it or not. It has everything to do with our economics, our food, our health, our environment. We have some of these small island states that are going to be perhaps moving to the mainland. The question came up in working groups, the WGIP, of what we're going to do with these small island states who are independent and they have a sovereign flag. Are they going to be given a piece of territory where they're on someone else's continent? It's community security. And when you look at the exacerbation, for instance, to go into Bristol Bay, the largest producing salmon with over 1 to 2 billion, with 3 to 4 billion alone per annum in this whole area, and they want to make a hole that will affect the aquifers and deny us and do irreparable damage to our fishing, our hunting, our trapping, destroying the moose, the caribou, the bears, everything that exists, even possibly making certain species of plants extinct. When you look at what they did up here with the Red Dog Mine, some of our indigenous peoples cannot even take subsistence in certain areas because they will die. And I wanted to show a video because what the Trump administration did is they took out all of the years of study under the Obama administration by the University of Washington, and all the testimony from the indigenous peoples, or my people in my area. I was born and raised in this area. I had a fishing boat. I did this commercial fishing, not only commercial but for subsistence. This is important in many ways, cultural, language. There's many things attached to this. So it's not only in Alaska, it's all over the world. So this climate change issue is affecting everyone. And so what do we want from you? We want not only for you to publish some of these grave violations, not to listen to national security issues. When the Pakistan came out with the call for United States to send Alaska, Hawaii, and others to the Decolonization Committee, they blocked this information in United Kingdom, Canada, United States of America, New Zealand, Australia, the major allies of United States. And it's a national security issue. When they want to kill or to harm a people, it's national security. And that's how they function and operate. So I guess with that, I could keep
No,
talking.
of course.
You can keep talking, yes.
Yeah.
No.
I would want
I want to-
participation
And I
from
want
the
to,
audience.
yes?
Yes. Which is the paragraph you thought I should read? Well,
Yeah.
No, I have not. In the human rights field, we have an endemic problem, which is a problem of perception, a problem of priorities. If you read the mainstream media and you read the narrative of major non-governmental organizations, you realize that this narrative is skewed, and they have, their pet subjects, and they are plugging that which the lobbies want them to plug. Ultimately, not only Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, the International Service of Human Rights, also the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, they depend, because they don't have a real budget, they depend on donations, and the donations make the music, and you have to dance to the tune of the donors. So that, shall we say, puts on, second category that which should be the first category. And what should be the first category? The United Nations Charter should be seen and applied as the world constitution. And if you apply that as the world constitution, the priorities are peace, development, and human rights, Articles 1 and 2 of the UN Charter. But then look at Article 1, paragraph 2. Article 1 is the self-determination article. But Article 1, paragraph 2 is people's sovereignty over their natural resources. That applies eminently in the case of Alaska. Now, they have trillions of dollars worth of natural resources for the benefit of the white people, basically, for the benefit of the United States corporations and the transnational corporations that go in. They take the oil, they take the gas, they take the uranium, they take the diamonds and the everything that is worth, and they don't share it with the peoples living there. That is the most amazing thing. You come do a looting campaign of Alaska, one of the richest areas in the world, and the indigenous live like church mice. They don't get their natural resources. They have been despoiled of their natural resources. Now, this has been brought to the attention of the Human Rights Committee, and I remember, thanks to a shadow report by Ambassador Barnes back in the examination of the third and fourth reports of the United States, there was included in the concluding observations, paragraphs 31 and 32, the necessity to look into this issue of the reparation due to the indigenous of Alaska. Needless to say, zero follow-up on that. And the United States never bothered to address those issues brought up in the concluding observations. Now, as far as self-determination is concerned, Human Rights Committee has been very clear. In cases of self-determination referenda, only those people with a genuine link to the land are allowed to vote. You're not going to allow the settlers to vote. It's ridiculous. We had a case, the Guillot against France case, in which a settler wanted to participate, and the committee said, no, you don't have a genuine link to the land. I mean, this self-determination referendum is intended, as in Timor-Leste, not to have all of the Indonesians vote, to have the people from East Timor vote. Those are the ones who should vote for their independence or not. So the same thing in Western Sahara. You're not going to have the Moroccan settlers voting in Western Sahara. That's why you do not conduct a referendum there. The other problem is a problem of legitimacy, the problem of representation. The United States, and not only the United States, every colonial power, whether in Asia, in India, in Africa, every colonial power doesn't deal with the people of the colonized country. They deal with a puppet. They find someone who will claim to speak on behalf of a people, and that person will immediately be recognized. We're going to deal with this person because this person is sold out. Does that ring a bell in modern post-colonial period? I mean, it's not the first time that someone has compared Juan Guaido with a puppet, who has compared Juan Guaido in his conduct serving the interests of a foreign state and pretending to represent his people. Now, if you want to do deals, to do business with Venezuela or with Cuba or with Nicaragua or with Bolivia, try to find someone who can legitimately represent that people and who actually does represent that people and is not just sold out like Quisling served the Nazis in the Second World War and Pierre Laval served the Nazis in Vichy and in the Second World War. I mean, question of legitimacy and of puppets is a central question which very frequently gets simply ignored, marginalized, as if it was not really an important point. Now, having said that, you mentioned, which is crucial, the environment. This pebble mine is going to be a catastrophe for the whole area. And it must be prevented. It must be prohibited. You need the mainstream media to take it up as one of the priority issues. Thus far, the mainstream media has failed. And not very optimistic that they are going to change their attitude. Now, you wanted me to quote something from my statement. Now, I had, during my 6 years as rapporteur, I enjoyed myself provoking and issuing 14 reports that were anything but politically correct. And that cost me, depending on the report, or that gave me the honor of being accused of, from being a fascist to a fucking fascist, to being a Marxist, a communist, a Chavista, a castrista, and recently the New York Times calling me radical chic. So at least I kind of like that one. As the case may be, on my very last day in office, I said, why not go with a bang and issue a memorandum that is going to annoy people? So I did. And it was sent to everybody. It was sent to the Secretary General, to the High Commissioner for Human Rights, member states, the chairman of the Human Rights Committee, chairperson of the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, et cetera, et cetera. And one of those paragraphs just simply reflects case law. I mean, I'm not inventing things. I am just quoting from American jurisprudence from the Supreme Court in its judgment way back when in the T. Hit Ton, the United States of America case, making it clear that the purpose of the acquisition was, for the settlement of the white race in the United States, where the dominant purpose of the whites in America was to occupy the land. And that one referred to an older judgment of the Supreme Court, and that was in the Johnson v. McIntosh, which held that the character and religion of the native inhabitants of America justified, and then I quote, considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy. Now, having been president of the Pen Club here in Switzerland for 7 years, I must say, chapeau. I like the way of saying this. Superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy. This is good English.
Yes.
This is nicely drafted, as indeed, when I was a student at Harvard, I remember, admiring the style of the judgments, and there was one in particular in an 1896 judgment, Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson, by the way, has not been overturned. It has been distinguished, mostly ignored because it's much too embarrassing. This is the case concerning a black person, an Afro-American, who just wanted to take the train, but he had to sit in a special section reserved for non-whites. And he didn't want that. He insisted on sitting in the regular train. So in any event, that went all the way up to the Supreme Court that said this is perfectly constitutional. Segregation does not violate any provision of the Bill of Rights or of the U.S. Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. So you read that today, you say this is surrealistic, notwithstanding the fact that it is in elegant English. When the effects of Plessy v. Ferguson were finally, shall we say, demolished, that was not by virtue of a judgment of the Supreme Court saying our predecessors wrote nonsense or our predecessors acted contra legem. No. It was the U.S. Congress in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and only by virtue of the new Civil Rights Act, it is that Plessy v. Ferguson is no longer operative. Otherwise, Plessy v. Ferguson would be the law of the land. And so that just to give you an impression how things evolve and how things change should give you at least a degree of optimism. Things have changed. Those who are so negative about the United Nations, I say, if the United Nations did not exist, we'd have to invent it because we need it. I mean, the world without law, the world without norms would be even worse than it is today. So be happy we have norms, be happy we have mechanisms. Yes. All we have to do is use them, and then we need you. We need the press. We need investigative journalists, and we need whistleblowers. I mean, people like Julian Assange, people like Edward Snowden, like Chelsea Manning, chapeau. These are the true human rights defenders whom I would like to see get the Nobel Prize for Peace, and not the people who usually get it, although this year was not too bad. But on occasion, there's people who get the Nobel Prize for Peace, and you say, how is that possible? So, having said that, questions and answers, I hope that there will be some questions. A question from the floor. Yeah.
Could you put your mic on? Your microphone? The microphone.
That one.
It's not working.
Oh.
Well, try another one.
It's good.
We are working. We are a TV company, and we work to document the identification of dead migrants in the Mediterranean Sea. The question is simple: is those people still have their human rights?
Well, that particular chapter, actually, and you prove it again, is one of the mainstream media chapters. That is being discussed at many, many levels, including at the Graduate Institute here. Of course, they have their human rights, but you always have to do a balancing. These people, why are they fleeing their countries? They're fleeing their countries partly because our dear transnational corporations have destroyed their economies. There are several studies by South Center that show how the International Monetary Fund has ruined country after country after country in Africa because through globalization they have destroyed the indigenous industry and the indigenous agriculture, therefore rendering people unemployed, and of course they have a human right to live and a human right to their families and a human right to want to have a future, and obviously they move. But you always have to look at the cause and not just try to put a Band-Aid to correct the effect. Again, why do we have 4 million Syrian refugees? And when I say Syrian refugees, I can mention Afghan refugees, Iraqi refugees, etc., etc. Because the United States and the so-called coalition of the willing destroyed Iraq. Kofi Annan, the late Kofi Annan, whom I respected very much, and I enjoyed speaking with him on several occasions. Kofi Annan at least had the courage to declare the Iraq adventure to be, as he said it, contrary to the principles of the UN Charter. And when the BBC journalist wasn't satisfied with the euphemism that it was incompatible with the UN Charter, said, "What does that mean, Mr. Secretary General?" Kofi Annan came out and said that means in simple English that the war, that the Iraq war is an illegal war. Yes. I mean, it's the crime of aggression. What not only the United States, because this is what the Germans would call an Urverbrechen, for a primeval crime. It's not just that the United States engaged in aggression. The United States does it every day. I mean, there's nothing new about it. Look at the book of Stephen Kinzer, Overthrow. How many governments have been overthrown by the United States in the last 200 years? He's actually, the Kinzer book begins with Alaska. Yeah. Alaska and Hawaii. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. It's not just that the United States simply is above the law and aggresses everybody, of course, to bring democracy to them, to bring human rights to them, and all the pretexts that I used. Because here, why do I call it a primeval crime? Why do I call it a revolt against international law and international order? Because United States pulled in 42 other countries, members of the United Nations, bound by the United Nations Charter, ostensibly democratic countries, in a massive aggression of a people which ended up costing 1 million human lives. What does the United States continue doing? Devastates Syria, devastates Libya. That causes refugee flows.
Yemen.
And devastates Yemen. I mean, and who bears the responsibility for the refugee flows? For driving people to risk their lives in the Mediterranean in order to reach safer shores. So I'm very much in favor of helping all of these desperate migrants and refugees, but far more important than dealing with the ex post facto consequences of American and European aggression in the area is to stop the aggressions, to stop the crimes that have led people to abandon their countries because their countries have been devastated. Yes?
Why is it so difficult to have a protocol for this identification? Because it seems that only Interpol has one, but not the European community or Maghreb. Everybody do his own process. Why is it so difficult to have a common protocol for them?
Well, I don't think that a common protocol for them is the solution. The solution is to stop the cause of the flow. And the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has a broad mandate, and it's they that conduct, for instance, the refugee status interviews, etc., etc. The organization, the International Organization on Migration, is also very much involved in these issues, but I don't find that an additional protocol, an additional convention or anything will change the landscape. The landscape will only be changed when the United States stops intervening in the internal affairs of states, stops subverting states. Don't forget, and that is public, it's in the internet, you can see it, when General Wesley Clark in this famous interview explains how he was given a memorandum emanating from the Pentagon in which Rumsfeld was writing about, we are going to take 7 governments down in the Middle East in the coming years. And those 7 governments included, of course, Syria and Iran and Iraq and Libya, etc., etc. So we're more or less on schedule in subverting all of these countries, in causing enormous migratory flows, migratory and refugee flows, and that is not being corrected. We are trying to put Band-Aids. We're trying to save a couple of hundred people or a couple of thousand people in the Mediterranean. These people are entitled to help, no question. We should rescue as many as we can. But I think we should put the blame where the blame lies. And the blame lies in aggression. The blame lies in both military and economic aggression. And as I said, very good analysis have been written by South Center. Very good analysis have been written by CETIM, the Centre Tiers-Monde here in Geneva. That is a very serious NGO. But there's no follow-up to that. Yes?
I understand what you said. It's true. Everybody knows that. But the problem is you don't answer my question. It's how you can have a protocol for those diseases people we find on the shore of Europe. How do you identify them?
Well, as I said, the organization that has the competence is the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. And there I would say I would love to see the United States giving more money to the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. I would like to see Europe giving more money to the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. And I would like to see also a change of heart not only in Washington, and that will not happen as long as Donald Trump is president. I would like to see a change of heart in Brussels. I would like to see the new foreign minister the European Union coming forward with some concrete proposals and proposals that will address the causes and not just try to repair the damage.
We have
Another question over there.
Don't seem to be working. These don't seem to be working.
One of the main problems here, a complete lack of joined-up thinking. When you talk about the work of the United Nations, it all seems so abstract. And when I say abstract, I remember when the protests in Syria were still protests. They were street protests, they were pacific, and I was in touch with a lot of people on the ground at the time. And I'd been asked to find out what Assad was doing with his money. And via a team of other journalists, we saw that money flows were going through countries throughout Europe, that a lot of money was probably coming from Russia, but that there were money flows through banks in Romania, in Switzerland, in the UK, across the board. And that companies that had been put on the EU sanctions lists were actually moving money throughout Europe. I tried 80 times to speak to the office of it was Lady Ashton at the commission that was responsible for sanctions. There was one person responsible for sanctions. I can't remember his name now. It was one person who was responsible for deciding on proposing applications of sanctions, etc. Another thing that I realised was that there was sea traffic coming down through the Mediterranean. Ships that were stopping off on the coast of Romania that had originally trafficked cargoes from Russia to Tartus in Syria, and we wanted to know what was in these ships, why they were so heavily laden when they arrived there, and why they were so high in the water when they left. And 6 months later, we didn't have any resources to actually go and investigate and do this, and this was Reuters money. I asked, again, inside several times for resources to actually investigate what was happening. 6 months later, we found it was reported by another news organisation that this was actually arms traffic from Russia. All under the noses of the United Nations, the European Union. It was stuff that was visible to us, and nothing was done about it. So isn't one of the main problems here lack of transparency, lack of joined up thinking, and money flows that could quite easily be blocked, but that aren't because there are too many interests actually behind the freedom of these flows?
Well, lack of transparency is endemic, huh? And it concerns Europe, and it concerns the United States, and it concerns Asia and Africa, etc. You're focusing now on Syria, but Syria is an authoritarian government. We all know that. But yeah, but I mean, you're stepping into the issue at the level of non-observance of sanctions. Now, the question is whether the European sanctions were legitimate, whether they were not an interference in the internal affairs of a state. Why the selectivity? Why the picking and choosing? Why does Europe want to bring the government of Syria down?
It wasn't about bringing the government down. It was about, we've identified these companies that are involved in the repression of popular protests. This was the same Gaddafi or Mohammed Gaddafi, who was funneling money through Switzerland, whose middleman was arrested here. Are you suggesting that he shouldn't have been arrested because it's interference in another country?
I'm suggesting that international law is being applied a la carte, that international law is being applied in the most obscene manner, selectively, thereby taking all of the legitimacy out of international law. I mean, a system of international order functions only when the norms are applied uniformly, and not when you're weaponizing human rights, or you are Orwellinicizing international law only to take out, like the 7 governments that the Pentagon wanted to take out. And then you're concerned that it doesn't work. Well, of course it doesn't work because of economic interest, and the economic interests are a factum. They're not going to change. So if I'm saying that.
Now, you're saying that governments should not be allowed to, international organizations should not be selectively applying rules that they've established that everyone has agreed to, correct? Okay.
Correct.
What about the selective disclosure of material that you gathered? As we've seen with Assange, and we know that this is true, we're journalists here, we know that what has been leaked, what has been passed, and what has been selectively leaked.
No, actually, I would like to have full transparency. As I said, we need many more Julian Assanges and many more Edward Snowdens, so that we know what crimes are being committed in our name. Me, as an American, I always want to say, not in my name. My government is committing atrocities throughout the world. All I can say is not in my name, and I'm thankful to Julian Assange at least to have shown us the tip of the iceberg, things that we have done in Afghanistan and in Iraq. But going back to the tragedy of Syria, the Syrian war that has lasted now for 8 years is a direct result of illegal intervention by the United States, by Saudi Arabia, by Israel, by the Europeans in the internal affairs of a state with a clear purpose to bring it down.
Excuse me if I try and correct you on that.
Yeah.
I could see Russian intervention already from the end of 2011. What about that? Do you mention
In international law, the rule is very clear. Russia has been asked by the government of Syria for assistance. In international law, that is legal. The government whenever there's a civil war, for instance, the incumbent government, you don't have to like the incumbent government, you don't have to help the incumbent government, but you cannot subvert it. You cannot, United Nations International Court of Justice said so very clearly in the judgment Nicaragua against the United States in the military and paramilitary aid of the United States to the Contras through this absolutely surrealistic, corrupt Iran-Contra affair in the United States, really shocking affair in the 1980s.
prior to that, they supported Somoza. So you're saying they were right to support Somoza?
No.
If we take it to
No, I am saying,
if we take it to the extreme, what you're saying,
yeah.
then you are saying they legitimately support Somoza.
I take your point,
Okay.
but in the case of Syria, intervention, military intervention, support of the military insurgents in Syria is a violation at the if they had if
Could I intervene for a second?
yeah.
Because if anyone else wants to ask a question, okay, we have, and then because
No,
I
we
want-
can discuss it
I
among
also
ourselves.
want to comment on what you said also, and maybe Majid does.
No, but just very briefly, taking your point of the money laundering, that is the issue, to be quite honest. Yeah, that was your basic question. There is a selective approach in that. There is no doubt as to that. And in every action, whether it is political, economic, or whatever it is, there has to be a political will behind it. And the political will is very selective. And in this case, that probably was not applied, that, okay, let these people launder the money, and we just keep quiet, and at least it's coming to Europe or whatever it is. And therefore, the selective approach was there, to be quite honest. Everything, you would agree with me, is decided at WTO, World Trade Organization.
And actually,
Okay.
the watchdog,
question
no,
from-
just one last word for the watchdog.
Yeah.
The watchdog is the United Nations Office
Yes.
for Drug and Crime in Vienna. And that is the office that should be investigating all cases of money laundering and applying the United Nations Convention Against Corruption uniformly, not selectively. But we see in the entire human rights system, we see a weaponization of human rights, which actually destroys the whole concept of human dignity. When we demonize, when we just focus on this little criminal, of course he's a criminal, but we give impunity to all the others. So that is the problem that makes the system lose its credibility, and that actually is the crisis of human rights today. That human rights have been weaponized only to destabilize your political or economic rival, your competitor, your enemy. But then all of your friends, the United States, vituperates against undemocratic countries. What country is more undemocratic than Saudi Arabia?
Two questions, one
Yeah.
No,
here
Merit,
and
on
one
that
there.
side, women have not spoken. Please.
I'm just listening. I'm learning a lot, so I'll continue listening to you guys.
Okay, go ahead, pose your question.
Just a quick question to Professor Zayas. The legal definition of those only with a link to the land, please.
Link
How
to?
many years does it go back to? How many centuries? Brief, please.
Well, basically, if you read the travaux préparatoires of Article 1 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, by the way, my friend Bill Shabas just presented at the Graduate Institute a few weeks ago his new book, the third edition, updated of Manfred Novak's CCPR commentary, the commentary on the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I mean, it's absolutely magnificent. It's a book that you have to get. His book and the book by Marc Bassoit on the travaux préparatoires of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, these two sources, you will see that although they don't actually put a specific number of years, you see some countries talking about 2-3 generations, what makes a people a people. You have the Kirby definition, Justice Michael Kirby from Australia. He's 88 years old. Back in the 1980s, he was asked in an international conference of the UNESCO to define the concept of peoples. I mean, who can invoke Article 1 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And he has, by far and away, the best definition. And I can give you my report to the General Assembly on Self-Determination. I quote it. So basically, as a rule of thumb, you would say that 3 generations would already give you the right to participate in a self-determination referendum. But of course, the situation is a bit different if you look at the context of the Americas. I mean, whereas there was decolonization in Africa, there was decolonization in Asia, there was never decolonization in North or South America, because what you had in North and South America was genocide. You had millions of indigenous simply massacred, or, of course, unfortunately died because of disease, etc., etc. You have the majority population becoming, in North America, a minuscule minority. So they don't count anymore. So when you conduct a referendum, for instance, you can't conduct a referendum if you've killed 99% of them. That didn't work for the Spanish colonies of Mexico, Central America, and South America, because there were, when the Spaniards arrived, at least, I mean, some estimates are higher, but at least 60 million of them. So when you have 60 million indigenous in Mexico, in Peru, in Ecuador, etc., it's not easy to displace them. So what happened is you have a white elite controlling that majority population, as you had the white elite controlling the majority population in South Africa. And that ended when the world said enough of apartheid, and they had to, in fact, give up. That has not happened in Latin America, and in the one country where the indigenous finally had their own president, and that president pulled millions and millions of Bolivians out of abject poverty and had the best growing economy in all of Latin America and had success after success, then he gets kicked out through a military putsch, yet another right-wing putsch in Latin America. So it's funny, it's not tolerated in Africa to have a white minority government controlling the majority black population of South Africa, but it is tolerated in most countries of Latin America to have a white elite controlling the rest of the indigenous population. And let's see what will now happen in Bolivia. But going back, my recommendation, get yourself the book by Bill Chavas, the CCPR commentary, and read then what he writes on Article 1 of the Covenant, and Article 1, Paragraph 2, which is very important. People tend to forget that one. Article 1, Paragraph 2 focuses on people's sovereignty over natural resources. And why do the Alaska indigenous don't get anywhere? It's because they don't have any money. I mean, they have been looted, and they don't have enough money to get a decent lawyer to present their cases, whether it be to the United States jurisdiction or to bring the case to international fora. That costs money, and they don't have it.
Well, let me
Go ahead.
bring something, because you had mentioned about the banks. What we're discovering is that European banks, whether they come from Switzerland, Germany, or other parts of Europe, they're investing heavily in the Keystone Pipeline, or, for instance, their pension fund is investing in the Keystone Pipeline, or their funds where they need money because they don't have enough money. they're investing in exploitation in South America or Alaska. Some of the interventions I've made have had an effect where we accused or we said, China, you have no right to come into Alaska and put $50 billion. I don't know why, but China does pull out. Then we say to Israel, what are you doing investing in Alaska? We don't know what happened up there, but we know that Israel, for all of its history of being a victim, they themselves have victimized others. Now they continue to victimize others, and we're of no consequence. So we're looking at hypocrisy all over the world. And not only that, when I made an intervention saying if it looks like a, acts like a, walks like a, talks like a, it's a politicization and selectivity, to quote one of the ambassadors who accused Europe. What we're talking about is them selectively looking the other way when it benefits them. And you can say the same thing, what happened in Libya or in other parts of the world where they foment political strife. We could see it in South America. And then they support because one of their big partners is losing their right to exploit others. And if you look at the history, especially the 1803 Permanent Sovereignty over Natural Resources, it goes straight with the same narrative of this discussion on the right to development. They're saying the same exact thing, as if these Europeans are being deprived of their right to exploit everybody else.
That's good.
And that's exactly what they're doing.
Any more questions?
No, I'm just going to say in my 40 years of working in the field of human rights, as a professor of law, as a professor of human rights, as a senior lawyer for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as secretary of the Human Rights Committee, as independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order, what have I seen is a progressive corruption of terms and a progressive weaponization of human rights. When Theo van Boven hired me into the system, Theo van Boven, whom is one of my heroes, I mean, here you have really an attempt to have human rights for all. And what I see in the system today, with the connivance of the media, unfortunately, with the connivance of many major non-governmental organizations that depend on their donors, and their donors tell them what to do, what I see is selectivity right across the board over certain things. Some things become the flavor of the month. We have to talk about this or about that. But the priorities are all wrong. And what we need is, and I think Michelle Bachelet is doing a better job than her predecessor, but in any event, we need someone who has the courage to call a spade, and someone to try to cover the whole field. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to thank Venezuela for appearing here.
Felix.
Yes. I think we should close up.
Depending, I was still hoping, I'm giving a chance to Micheline to come. I haven't seen Micheline for a while.
Well,
What time is it? I don't even know.
It's 1:10.
Okay.
We're well after.
Well, as I said, in the back, you can pick up this little brochure. This is one of the unsung victims of history. The Pontian Greeks massacred, expelled, subjected to genocide, and nobody cares. And at least, well, I mean, the Erdogan government does care because they reacted immediately. When we opened the conference on Friday, already Saturday morning, there was a blasting article against us, you know, for being revisionists.
Okay, we've got some Lebanese lunch if you would like to share that.
That sounds very good.
thank you.
And
Thank you
we
very
can
much.
chat if you wish. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.